Hello there and welcome to Chapter 8, in which Maya finds herself face to face with a rather nasty ogre. Chapter 8. Maya wasn't unconscious for long. At first glance, she thought there was something very wrong with her eyes, until she realised that the reason her head pounded and everything looked so topsy-turvy was because she herself was hanging upside down. Entangled in a goblin's net and strapped to the side of one of the large wolves, she bobbed up and down with the rhythm of the animal's lumbering gait. The wolf pack moved silently, one after the other, in single file along a dirt track that snaked through the dark forest. From somewhere nearby, Maya could hear the faint sound of a gnome crying. "Hush your whimpering," one of the hobgoblins snapped. "You won't last the night if you carry on like that. Not where we're going." "What does Borgrim want with all these gnomes anyway?" another rider called out from behind. "I heard something about the old forge beneath the castle," the goblin directly above Maya chipped in. "Who cares what happens to them?" the first rider shouted back, "as long as we get paid." Maya tried to get a look at the hobgoblins as they signalled their approvals with nods and hear-hears, but the gang of poachers all wore their hoods so low over their heads that their faces were all in shadow. Up ahead, the track crested a hill, and further down Maya glimpsed a rough encampment through the trees. The riders began their descent, and it wasn't long before they were trudging up to the front gates. "Halt!" a voice called out from above. "Who goes there?" "Never you mind who goes where," the leader of the wolf pack called back. "Open up these gates and let us through so we can deliver our goods to Borgrim and be on our way." At the mention of the name Borgrim, the guards behind the gate leapt into action and pulled the bolt back, and the two doors swung open simultaneously. The camp was lit by the occasional burning torch, and in the dim light Maya could see tall metal fences topped with coils of razor-sharp wire. As they passed one of these fences, a gnome's face appeared out of the gloom, pale and drawn. She looked lost and bereft of hope. Her dispassionate stare chilled Maya to her very core. The gnome seemed to be looking straight through the wolf pack as it glided on by. Maya found she couldn't look away. Gradually, the gnome's ghostly face receded into the darkness, but her pitiful round eyes intruded Maya's thoughts for a long time after. The wolf pack made their way towards a massive tent that rose up above the rest of the camp like a church steeple. As they drew nearer, they were stopped by more guards, and Maya got her first proper look at what a goblin looked like. These goblins wore workers' clothes and heavy boots and carried little wooden truncheons at their sides. They were roughly the same size as a gnome, but their faces were markedly different. Like the gnomes, their heads were disproportionately large for their bodies, but where the gnomes' noses were flat and round, the goblins were longer and pointy. They had pointy little ears too, that drooped slightly at the end, but none of them wore beards. In fact, they didn't appear to have any hair at all. Their little brown caps sat neatly upon their round, bald heads, and when the guard closest to Maya opened his mouth to speak, she noticed he had a mouth full of sharp, pointy teeth. "Take him over to the camp clerks for processing," the goblin guard said with an air of self-importance. "Not before we've seen Borgrim and been paid," the leader of the wolf pack snarled back. "We're under strict instructions that Borgrim is not to be disturbed," the goblin guard said, as though the matter was closed. Without warning, the leader of the wolf pack dug his heels into the ribs of his mount, and the beast leapt on top of the unsuspecting guard. The wolf's snarling jaws hovered inches above the guard's face, and the animal would have happily sunk its teeth into the goblin's neck had it not been for the tight fist of its rider yanking on the scruff of its neck. "I'm sure we can make an exception on this occasion," the guard stammered, as a long bead of saliva from the mouth of the snarling wolf slid down his cheek. As the rest of the guards parted to let the riders through, Maya heard one of them mutter under his breath to his companion, "Those hobgoblins think they can do whatever they please. Gets right under my skin." The wolf pack headed straight for the tall tent, and when they were 10 feet or so away, they emptied their nets one by one into a pile on the floor and then formed a tight circle around the mound of groaning bodies. "On your feet," one of the riders shouted down. The frightened gnomes, tired and sore from being bunched up, clambered unsteadily to their feet. Maya suddenly felt Pete's hands holding her down. "Don't get up," he whispered, thrusting a scarf into her hands. She quickly wrapped it around her head and peered through the huddle towards the entrance of the tent. The leader of the wolf pack strode up to a bell hanging from a post and rang it several times. A wily-looking goblin wearing a black suit and round spectacles on the bridge of his nose appeared from inside. "Yes? What do you want?" he said quickly in a high nasal voice. "An audience with the great Borgrim," the hobgoblin replied, looking past this bookish goblin and into the tent behind him. "The mighty Borgrim," the goblin said, pulling his spectacles down to the end of his nose and eyeballing the larger hobgoblin, "is preparing a meal, and as I'm sure you're fully aware, it is not customary to interrupt an ogre during the preparation of a meal." The hobgoblin opened his mouth to object, but before he could, the tent burst open and a great ugly ogre, nostrils flaring, came crashing out. The bespectacled goblin, too slow to react, let out a surprised cry as he was thrown face first into a pile of mud. The ogre loomed over them as big as a house and scanned the gathering with his wild, bloodshot eyes. Confronted with this terrifying sight, the wolves began to yap and snarl, and the riders pulled their reins to control their weaning mounts. Maya stared desperately at the gnomes around her, who could do nothing but stare back helplessly. "Grunwald!" the ogre roared. "I smell the blood of a human child." Thanks for watching. Stay safe, stay indoors, and look after one another.